a warm welcome and hello, and thank you for standing by and joining us. My name is Peter Brusilowski, and I will be your host today. Thank you for joining our webinar, and I'm a HashiCorp Enterprise Sales Executive. And today, we're excited to talk about my customer, Contentful, and their innovative journey with Terraform Cloud, which I had the pleasure to watch very closely. Joining me today is HashiCorp's field CTO, Christian Riley, who will talk about how to accelerate cloud adoption safely, reliable, and cost effectively. After that, Christian will talk with James Bourne, the senior software engineer at Contentful, about Contentful's journey with Terraform Cloud. Before we start, a short hint to our housekeeping items and rules. So this webinar is being recorded, and the record will be made available after post-processing, usually within, let's say, 2 business days. Last, please type your questions in the question box down. As you can see, it's called in German Frage und Antwort. In English, it's the Q&A session. With that, let's jump into the first agenda point, and I will turn it over to Christian. Christian, thank you. So,
thank you, Peter, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for giving up the time today for the webinar. I am Christian Riley, Field CTO here at HashiCorp, and today I would like to introduce you to the cloud operating model. At HashiCorp, so maybe before I dive in, I want to give you some background on the company for those who may not be overly familiar with HashiCorp. We are in the business of helping customers around the world to adopt the cloud with a number of products and solutions that really help to address the challenges across infrastructure operations, networking, security, and of course in application delivery. And the HashiCorp software suite really enables organizations to adopt more consistent workflows and create what we call a system of record, which helps with automation of cloud and has really become the standard for cloud infrastructure automation. We're very proud of the fact that across the HashiCorp portfolio, these products have become increasingly the standard for organizations around the world who are adopting cloud. And today we're very proud of the fact that we have over 3,500 customers, and about 180 of those customers are in the Fortune 500. And just in terms of giving you a little bit of an insight into why we think this is a very exciting time, not just for the industry, but also for HashiCorp. You can see from the chart here, if you look at the growth figures from the sort of the left to the right, this sort of growth really shows the overall size of the total addressable market for cloud infrastructure in general. And if you look there, you'll sort of see that's kind of across AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. So the great news about this is, and I'm not a business major, but if I always think about charts that I see, and anything that goes up and to the right is usually a good indication of growth. We're very excited that obviously as this a huge market continues to grow, so does the opportunity that we have within HashiCorp. So we're very excited to be working with a lot of those cloud providers to make sure that organizations who are adopting multi-cloud strategies can use the HashiCorp solutions to really help drive adoption and simplification of those different cloud services. So in terms of the way we think about the end-to-end value proposition from HashiCorp, there's really 3 very sort of simple approaches to that. So the first one is the enablement of the cloud operating model, which I'll cover today, with a one-stop solution for cloud automation. In terms of the kind of the types of organizations that we deal with and the functions within these organizations, we're seeing a very significant growth in the concepts of platform teams. So if you think historically we had independent teams that were doing different things, and then over time we got into the concepts of DevOps and then DevSecOps, we're actually seeing now a growth in the realization of platform teams within organizations, and we'll talk a little bit about how the HashiCorp solutions really help enable those platform teams to be successful. And then thirdly on there, we're actually sort of trying to focus very clearly now on having one integrated product suite. And so you think about that in terms of 2 different delivery models, one which is a self-managed on-premises concept, and then the one that we'll talk with James about today is HashiCorp Cloud and the services that we have within the HashiCorp Cloud platform. So I think it's probably important to understand a little bit about what we've seen in terms of the evolution of sort of traditional technology environments and maybe some of the changes that we've seen and fundamental changes that we've seen over the past 10 years or so. Of course, HashiCorp has been around for 12 or 13 years now. And then we're really seeing this begin to accelerate across different customers in different industries all around the world. And so if we think about how to get started on just understanding the concepts of some of the changes that we've seen, so I think it's fair to say that everybody would recognize that the move to cloud is certainly happening at pace. But what does that really look like? So I think if you step back and think about what organizations have traditionally dealt with, they were data centers that were either in your own locations or maybe co-located facilities. And they were sort of very traditional in concept, lots of physical servers, and then obviously virtualization, storage area networks, core networking that we've seen host many applications over the years in traditional organizations. But I think what we've certainly seen over the last few years is the evolution of infrastructure automation and orchestration that's actually helped to catapult private cloud into view in many organizations and then be augmented with public cloud services. And we've seen organizations really begin to think about what we would call now a modern or dynamic data center, where there's still a combination of some of the private estate, but then there are one or more public cloud providers and a variety of different infrastructure types that are all interacted with through some kind of management construct and in many cases, APIs that allow you to be more programmatic about how we deliver and manage and operate the infrastructure. So I think fundamentally this move has really introduced some new principles at each layer. So we think about infrastructure, security, networking, and applications as the layers that we typically have seen in the way that traditional on-premises would be provisioned and managed. And I think there's a few fundamental things that we've seen change significantly as we've moved towards that more dynamic data center approach. So historically, what we've seen from the left-hand side of the diagram here is that in that world of sort of traditional data center, there's lots of different pairs of hands that have to be involved in the setup, the configuration, the provision, and the management. And they were often very distinct sets of teams with very distinct sets of skills that were required to sort of build that stack in the traditional data center. The big change that we've seen in the modern equivalent is that infrastructure as code has become fundamental to the way that engineering and development teams actually deliver the types of services that are required for the migration and operations and the cloud native capabilities that are in those public cloud environments. So we've seen from an infrastructure perspective that we've moved away from dedicated and virtual servers being provisioned in sort of automation and orchestration V1 into fundamentally infrastructure as code. We've seen security change from being very high trust and based on IPs and firewall rules that were traditional in our data centers. And we've kind of moved that security to being much more around identity. We've seen networking change from being host-based, where literally every device and every host on the network would have a static IP address that was assigned, and that static IP address would typically be very long-lived in that environment. And then the sort of types of networking that we've seen through VLANs and other sort of routing constructs in traditional data centers are now giving way to a very different approach that we think about as a service-based approach to networking. So if you think about traditional networking as being very sort of IP-based layer 3 in the OSI stack, we're now seeing that those service-based networking take us much more into the application level. And then, of course, applications, most organizations are dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of traditional on-premises applications. And the fact is that we're seeing a significant growth in public cloud applications, whether they've been migrated in sort of lift and shift approaches, or whether they've been created on a greenfield approach using many of the sort of cloud native technologies and architectures that are available across the public cloud providers. What I would also observe in this sort of fundamental shift in the approach, each of the cloud providers, because they're in competition with each other, of course, have different offerings, different differentiated offerings, different tooling and ways to engage and manage and deliver effectively on the sort of new paradigm of public cloud. And if you think about some of the simple examples on here of just how different the cloud providers view their offerings within the construct of their own boundaries, if you're a customer that has a multi-cloud approach, very quickly this matrix that you see here begins to get very complicated. And when you think about the number of development teams, maybe it's tens or hundreds of development teams across larger organizations, this can lead to a significant barrier to entry in terms of understanding all of the core capabilities, the complexities of each of those, and then how to sort of approach the management of that individually so that we can gain efficiencies by leveraging the technologies and the services that are available, but having to sort of lower the cognitive overhead on each of the development or operations teams, because they really have to spend a lot of time understanding the differences and the capabilities of each one, and get to a sort of a level of excellence and expertise across each public cloud provider. So from a HashiCorp perspective, one of the views that we have is around what we call enabling market standardization. So if you think about all of the complexity that you saw in the matrix on the previous chart, the solution set that we're putting together with HashiCorp is really intended to obfuscate the complexities across each of the capabilities within those public cloud providers. So if you think of the simple example here that we talk about from an infrastructure, security, and a networking perspective, the goal that we have here is to take away all of the complexity that would be on a customer to understand how each of those services from each cloud provider works, multiplied by the combinations of all those required for any particular cloud strategy, and then bring the approach from HashiCorp to say, okay, if you take a look at it from a Terraform perspective, we will cover all of the infrastructure requirements that each cloud provider has and each customer has by providing a single Terraform solution that is understandable in one way and applicable in multi ways. And it's the same story for Vault from a security perspective. Traditionally, we've seen Vault used in a secrets management way, but in many more cases, we're seeing Vault, because of the capabilities that Vault has, be used for advanced things like encryption as a service across different types of cloud providers and cloud services. And then finally, from the example here in networking, as we move away from sort of traditional IP-based networking approaches, and we think about what it takes to connect, securely connect, and have performance across different cloud native application constructs, we're beginning to think about Console there being ever more used as a service networking platform that allows you to connect and manage different types of cloud native services, whether that be Kubernetes or all the different types of Kubernetes offerings that are across the cloud providers, and use Console in a way that allows you to discover those services as you build them out, and then also to securely network them as you think about how those different types of applications need to interact with each other on a sort of a daily operational basis. So the way we do that is by focusing on our providers and integrations. So the real secret sauce within HashiCorp is the strength that we have within the ecosystem. If you're familiar with HashiCorp, you'll know that HashiCorp started as a very fundamental open source company back when it was born. And there was a reason for that, which was really to allow us to build an ecosystem and to invite many contributions from around that ecosystem to allow us to create all of the different types of providers and integrations that you see, that really do take away all of that difficulty in understanding. So if I'm going to use a set of services from Azure, or a set of services from GCP, or a set of services from different cloud providers or on-prem providers, we need to have a very rich ecosystem that allows us to create those providers, so that when you interact with the HashiCorp solutions, they are already obfuscating the complexity from the northbound APIs for each of those different types of services. So you can think about the ecosystem as being a fundamental and a very important part of the way that we think about how to bring overall value, so that each of your teams and your operational teams and your development teams and your platform engineering teams is really only learning one set of tools, which is the HashiCorp solution set. And then by benefit of all of the providers and integrations that we have, the operations there are from the cloud perspective become very seamless. So that's kind of a little bit of an introduction to HashiCorp and how we got to where we are. Maybe it's important now to just talk a little bit about how you actually think about this in your journey. So my initial observation would be that each customer that we interact with, and we'll hear, of course, from James about the story at Contentful, we see that there's a pattern that gets established pretty readily within each organization. So the principles that we see, there really has to be a new approach to how we interact with infrastructure. So again, remember I talked earlier about the number of different teams that we've seen historically and the number of different distinct skill sets that we had to have within a traditional data center approach. So navigating the sort of the path to cloud adoption is a challenge that most organizations will have to solve, whether it's today or tomorrow or the next day. And we've really begun to understand a pattern of what we see in each customer. And the blueprint that emerges from that is what we've now called the cloud operating model. So you can think of the cloud operating model really as kind of a three-phase approach that we see that customers adopt at different stages of their journey as they get introduced to cloud, as they become more comfortable with cloud, and then ultimately as they scale and make cloud exactly what it is that they do every day. So the first stage in this that we see is traditionally application teams or development teams, they go looking for new tools that are available on the market, which helps them to effectively reduce the speed that it takes them to get their services into production. So applications or services that need into production. So the provisioning layer, as we talked about here, you may have Terraform open source gets downloaded into your environment. You may already be using things like Azure Resource Manager or AWS CloudFormation or a number of other things that are out there on the market. But what we see in this first stage of adopting is that typically each engineering team or each development team within an organization tends to kind of do their own thing. So this becomes a very tactical approach. And while ever it gives some benefit, the challenge is that when you multiply this out across an organization where each subsection of the organization is kind of doing their own thing, it becomes a little bit challenging from a consistency perspective. So what we're really after here from the get-go is a set of consistent workflows. But when we have it in a tactical way where each team is kind of doing their own thing, we tend to get a lot of sprawl. We don't have a lot of centralized knowledge, and we don't really have a great visibility into exactly what it is that we've provisioned across an organization. And of course, that can be difficult from a complexity perspective, but it can also bring some risk, specifically around vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, that when you multiply that by a number of teams doing their own thing, that gets to be quite concerning from an overall sort of security and operational posture perspective. So what we typically see is that organizations, when they've got familiar with the tactical cloud approach, very quickly after that, because of the value that we see derived by the customer, they begin to introduce a cloud program of some sort. Now, these cloud programs have had different names over the years. In some cases, it's been called site reliability engineering, or in some cases, it's been a cloud center of excellence or a cloud competency center. Whatever you call it, I think it's important to understand that the change from just adopting a tactical and moving to a standardized cloud program is one that typically brings in different stakeholders from within the organization. So more often than not, we see a central team that maybe reports to a CIO or a CTO or a VP of operations or a VP of engineering, depending on how your own team is configured. What we typically see then is that cloud program is run by a central team, and then there are central services that are created for the very same things around provisioning, security, networking, connectivity. But the ultimate goal here is that something more repeatable is implemented to get more benefit more quickly across the rest of the organization, rather than having each of the teams do their own thing. And then the third piece of this is what we talk to relative to scale. And this, the difference really between the standardizing and scale is that when organizations get more mature, when this platform team concept becomes more of a product within the organization that helps the organization deliver things more repeatably, it's often at that point where the private estate, whether that be on-premises infrastructure from, say, a VMware or other different providers, we typically see organizations then wanting to fold all of that into their operation, so that the very same benefits that we get across provisioning and security and networking are then leveraged across the entire estate. It's incredibly common in our experience for organizations to be dealing with a hybrid and multi-cloud model at the same time. So, whether you're a traditional organization, a company that's been around for many years, or, maybe a younger company, there's always a chance that there's this hybrid approach. So some things remain on premises. Maybe that's because of the type of application it is that doesn't suit cloud, or maybe the data that's in that needs to reside within your own locations for data sovereignty or for security. we typically see that the hybrid and the multi-cloud model is the most prominent model across different companies in different industries. And so when you think about this journey, everybody starts with the tactical cloud. The cloud program then becomes about how to standardize that so that we can get more benefit across more parts of the organization with a standard approach. And then as we get to scale, we really begin to understand how the benefit of a product-based approach from a platform team can bring in different parts of the infrastructure and make sure that, the ultimate goal is that you have one set of integrated workflows that provide all of the benefits that we've talked about across different types of infrastructure, be that public or private. So I guess just to kind of maybe summarize a little bit here in the evolution and I guess more specifically the logical journey that most organizations take, we'd like to think that the HashiCorp products and the way that we think about how to build those products, operate them, and then derive value from them, we would like to think that they are a key enabler which helps both the emerging teams and the more mature teams to deliver and standardize these shared services across each stage. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. So maybe in stage one, in the adopting phase, we will typically see that these tools maybe are built by developers that help with a specific task or specific set of tasks. But more often than not, there's a clear need, for some basic automation orchestration. And of course, when we get into the standardizing and scaling, we like to think about the standardized workflows where that system of record becomes really important as a way to more efficiently manage the infrastructure. And then as we get through the standardizing and scaling pieces, other things come into consideration around observability, encryption, logging, auditability, compliance tooling. So, as you go through this journey and as more and more parts of your own organization begin to feed their requirements into the establishment and the growth of the platform team, you'll begin to see that more and more parts of the organization can fold in their requirements into the automation. And you'll see obviously things like policy as code be a great example of that as we begin to take the needs of security and compliance and build that into the overall approach. So the cloud operating model itself is actually complemented by another part of the sort of the HashiCorp story that we have, which we call the maturity model. And so you have to think about those two things as really complementary. So the cloud operating model and the cloud maturity model, they really join together to help customers understand exactly what would be expected at each phase of the journey. So you can think about the maturity model as a more comprehensive set of guidance for your own organization to really identify where you are within the cloud adoption journey. So sort of understand the challenges of where you are with the current state, and then help to plan a series of logical steps that are underpinned by the HashiCorp technologies and really help you sort of move through those logical phases with a lot more confidence. So just in terms of a little bit of familiarity with the HashiCorp product suite, and we tend to think about this in layers. So you'll be familiar with sort of the infrastructure layer that I talked about a little bit earlier. Image management, a key part of that, and infrastructure as code provisioning with Packer and with Terraform. When we think about security, we talked about secrets management, encryption as a service, and identity-based user access, which secures the administrative connectivity once these systems have been provisioned. So that will be our Vault and Boundary product. We talked about networking in terms of console and how that approach from being IP-based networking is very different as you build out different types of services and cloud native application architectures across the different cloud providers. And then finally, we think about applications. How can we sort of give an infrastructure all the way through to application set of tooling that helps you to think about how the platform teams need to evolve and how you need to evolve through that journey. We would become more familiar there with perhaps the Nomad product, and then ultimately with the Waypoint product, which is evolving into HashiCorp's internal developer platform. So you'll see, I guess the more time you spend with HashiCorp and the more you get to know it, you'll see these icons a lot, from Terraform into Packer, into Vault, into Boundary, into Console, into Nomad, and into Waypoint. Each has a very distinct set of capabilities. But as we talked about a little bit earlier, the goal here is for us to continue to build on a set of integrated products that are delivered either through self-managed means or delivered through our cloud platform, but ultimately are helping platform teams to understand how to build and operate a set of integrated workflows that ultimately lower the barrier to entry for developers in your own environment and enable those developers to worry less about infrastructure and security and sort of worry more about the quality of the applications that they're delivering, and of course increasing the time to market for each of those. So just to think about a little bit about platform teams, and the reason I wanted to sort of introduce platform teams is that, for the next, I would say 2 to 3 years, these are going to be extremely important concepts in the journey that we've seen from sort of DevOps through DevSecOps into platform teams. The way to think about the difference, in my opinion, between platform teams and what we've seen before is that platform teams, by their very definition, will own and operate a set of products that are delivered as a service internally, made available through internal developer platforms and internal developer portals to the ultimate recipient, which of course the customer of that is the developer themselves and the development teams. But what you'll see is that obviously platform teams will become a relatively new domain within traditional organizations and newer organizations, because the fundamental difference between what we've seen from DevOps and DevSecOps, which were really concepts more than products, is that you'll see, some of the requirements that we had through those different paradigms of DevOps and DevSecOps be folded in to the same sort of constructs as platform teams. But the big difference is that platform teams will be running sets of products that will sort of really need to be managed as any other product within any other organization. And I think that to me is a little bit of the key difference between what we've seen before and what we're going to see coming next. So with that, I'll just kind of pause on the sort of initial introduction there and welcome James Bourne to the webinar. So welcome, James. Good morning.
Hey, morning. Yeah, thanks. So I can just talk briefly about Contentful and just give you a bit of a story of how did we get here. Contentful was founded in 2013. Our founders, Sasha and Paolo, were working as software engineers and had this need while they were building mobile apps that they wanted to update the content in these mobile apps, but the app review cycle meant that this could take days or weeks, and traditional CMSs at the time they weren't filling that need of being able to provide this structured content that could be consumed from a mobile app. So if you think HTML was the delivery mechanism of old school CMSs, but of course trying to fit that into a mobile app that you're running on iOS or Android doesn't lead to a great user experience. So they were really focused on how can we deliver this content and deliver updates as quickly as possible, but still provide that great experience on these new and emerging platforms. So initially the customer of Contentful was primarily developers, not wanting to use these old school CMSs, but now we've seen that evolution towards the entire content creation lifecycle. So looking at collaboration on how content is written, the workflow that content creators have and how do they get things out into the world. And now with new trends and things like AI, how can that fit into the content creation lifecycle? So to give you some numbers, just to paint a bit of a picture of Contentful, this Black Friday, we had 3.6 billion delivery requests just on a single day. And over the month, we served 90 billion API calls. And right now, I think we're at 30% of the Fortune 500 are using Contentful in some way to power their digital experiences. More of the under the hood stuff. So we've been using AWS for a long time to operate our services. I think it predates my time, so I can't completely vouch for this, but we started off on EC2, managed with some homegrown Ruby scripts, running things like Chef. Then when Kubernetes came around, we were quite an early adopter of that, and now, the current day, we're looking at things like serverless. So I think the big takeaway from that is that Terraform has become an even more important part of the life cycle of creating software. Back when it's just an EC2 instance, developers are maybe more focused on deploying an image maybe, and now actually the infrastructure with things like serverless, the infrastructure is the application. So it's really crucial for us that developers are able to operate Terraform in a scalable way. I did some digging, and I think we've been using Terraform for 8 years now, so since 2016, so fairly early adopters. And since then, we've introduced automation to our process. So using traditional CI systems to do things like automate plans, post results back on pull requests. And we saw the need to standardize that and consolidate that. And that's where Terraform Cloud came along as a really good fit of, out of the box, it does all the things we want, gives developers a preview of what's going to happen before they make the changes, and then manage the lifecycle of actually running the change, and then also validating the infrastructure once it's deployed into the environment. So my team, I'd say, back to what you were talking about there, Christian, is really fitting into that platform team category. Our customer is internal engineers at Contentful, and that's really our focus of what's their experience like, how can we make their lives easier. And also, like you said, with products, it's, where possible, we don't want to invest our time in building something. We want to bring something like Terraform Cloud to them and give them all the things they need to operate that as effectively as possible, and just get them straight into delivering value and not having to think about, doing the same thing that another team has done in a slightly different way. So yeah, standardization, I think you also touched on, is a big thing. The cloud is, it's big and it's getting bigger every day. There's more and more services that, they're great to use, but also there's plenty of ways you can misconfigure things. So my team is really focused on building a catalog of internal modules that we can give to teams. They take that off the shelf and they know it's going to be set up in the right way for them, and they can just get, skip past all of that configuration and get on to building things. So I think hopefully that gives you a bit of a picture of where we're at.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I guess every day is not like a Black Friday, David. That's some quite impressive scale that you guys had there in terms of the number of requests. So maybe if we could, James, just to kind of go back and maybe just align some of the things that, I mentioned in the introduction. With your own experiences. I mean, obviously, we talked a lot about the fact that it's not uncommon, and I think we've got some crazy numbers in terms of hundreds of millions of downloads of our open source and community technologies. And of course, once folks within the organizations see the value of that, it tends to sort of lead to a much different discussion set over time in terms of features, functions, capabilities, manageability, day-to operations, and so on. So just from your guys' own journey, is that something that resonates? Did you start off in a community open source edition, get to understand it a little bit? Would it have aligned with my sort of observations around the tactical cloud? And then, maybe you guys saw some different paths to ultimately the decision to adopt Terraform Cloud. I'd just kind of be really interested in how that journey evolved.
Yeah, so you're right. Yeah, we started off on the open source version of Terraform. Way back, I think even before Terraform Enterprise was a thing, or Terraform Cloud was a thing. It was, I guess, quite an ad hoc thing with maybe not a huge amount of standardization, or, scalability wasn't something we're really thinking about there. It was, hey, there's the cloud, we need to get out there and use it. That's the focus right now, less about, having a cloud center of excellence or something like that to bring that consistency. But now, as the company's grown, then it's really become the center of attention of how do we scale these practices? How do we onboard engineers to make sure they can pick up these things as quickly as possible, and really take them away from so much of the details of managing infrastructure, and really give them a straightforward entry point with as much working out of the box as possible. So when we talk about our adoption of Terraform Cloud, a big part of that has been looking at how can we get deliver new projects and allow people to iterate as quickly as possible. So my team is currently managing all of the configuration of Terraform Cloud. So it's now, I think we've managed to do this in like 5 minutes to get a new project, new workspaces set up. And we really see the value of that, of, innovation within the company is a product of how fast you can try new things. You're not going to get a hit straight away, but if you can try 10 different things in the time it would usually take to try out just one thing, then that's going to be a great way to increase the chances of success, I think.
Yeah, so maybe just for the benefit of the folks who are live with us, or maybe watching the recording, we talked a little bit about, the community edition, which is very much still at the, sort of the heart of HashiCorp's DNA in terms of the way that we started the company, and also, the ecosystem that we created for the providers and the things that I mentioned within the Terraform introduction. There's the self-managed piece, which obviously is the commercial version, which customers in many cases choose to operate, themselves. And then obviously there's the cloud version, which you guys are using, which, is a almost a SaaS-like, cloud delivered set of services solutions that bring the same value as self-managed, but obviously, sort of provisioned and managed by HashiCorp. It seems that you guys went from, kicking the tires with open source straight to cloud. Now, is there a reason that drove that decision? I mean, obviously, with you guys being a kind of a less traditional company, let me say, than some of the other ones that we work with very closely. What was it that drove that decision to say, we want to go straight to cloud versus, something that we might feel more comfortable managing ourselves? Just now, is that something in the DNA of the company, or is that part of the strategy to have, as much cloud as you can versus managing things yourselves? Just be interested to understand what drove that decision.
Yeah, I think we kind of see a lot of Contentful's values mirrored in Terraform Cloud. So both, API first, API centric products, very easy to integrate other tooling into. And of course, yeah, Contentful is completely, cloud hosted. You don't need to manage anything yourself. You just sign up and you get started. And that's exactly the experience we had with Terraform Cloud. We weren't having to worry about provisioning anything. We ran a proof of concept initially, and we were able to get something up and running really quickly with that without needing to go through the whole process of setting something up and running it ourselves. And also in the long term, it's taking that burden of having to maintain something or, patch something away from us. We just focus on getting the product to our customers, and we're not thinking about, all those other things, and we can move on to new projects and new ventures and improve the developer experience in other ways.
So let's touch a little bit on that developer experience if we can. I mean, and I think it's always good to try and understand the value and the benefits, whether we can put numbers on those or not. But I mean, if you could sort of go back to life before Terraform Cloud in Contentful, and you kind of look at where you guys are now, maybe you're kind of at the standardizing, looking towards the scaling piece of the model that we shared in terms of the way we think about that from the cloud operating model. If you go back to sort of life before HashiCorp at Contentful, what would have been the typical developer experience? And sort of if you take that same developer and move them forward to where you are now, what's been because obviously the developer experience, I think it has two sides personally. It has a let's call it a softer side, which means, and ultimately could lead to the fact that some developers, don't want to work with a company because the experience is terrible and everything's too difficult and it takes too long and everybody's in my way, versus the other end of the spectrum, which is like, oh, I just go to a portal, I click something and I'm done. So obviously that on the softer side, that's a good thing. On the sort of the more tangible side, obviously anything that you can do to speed the entire process to the point that certainly for, maybe revenue generating applications that can be delivered faster, you can deliver more features, more functionality, that either attract new customers or retain existing customers. What would you say has been the big difference in the developer experience? And if you were to pinpoint, the benefits of where you are in the overall adoption phase, what would that look like?
Yeah, so I think the big one for us is when you're an engineer making a change. As we've grown Contentful, we now operate EU data residency region. So that's meant we're now managing additional kind of instances of that same infrastructure we had before. And when you pile on top of that things like pre-prod environments, to ensure consistency there, any change that we were making was maybe needing to be applied in 5 or 6 different places. So Terraform Cloud automating that entire process has been a big thing. Like you get the PR merged and essentially you move on. There's nothing more to think about from that. Also with the security side of things, you talked about the kind of zero trust approach to security, moving away from things like just trusting a single IP address. And that's been a big piece for us, is having that confidence when we've done things like integrate Terraform Cloud with AWS using the OIDC connection. We can really restrict down and say this workspace should have access to this AWS account and nothing else. So we're actually now in a position where we have improved security around managing our infrastructure, because it's not just down to engineers and what changes they decide to apply locally. The whole thing can be traced through Terraform Cloud. You can see exactly what happened. And that brings me to another point, I think, where with that manual apply process that I talk about, maybe in some cases somebody tried something out in an environment but forgot to apply it somewhere else. But now with Terraform Cloud, there's a lot more consistency and confidence that the environment is going to be in a state that is known and is well defined by the configuration in the source control repo that's linked to that. So I think that's a big win for us. Is you go into a AWS account and you know exactly what you're going to find there, because it's all gone through that same consistent process. So I think that's it for us, is saving developers the time of having to worry about making these changes. They update the configuration once and that's it now. And also when they go into an environment, they're not having to worry about, did somebody else forget to apply their changes, or were they halfway doing something? It's now a much more well-defined process that we've got around making those changes.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of, let's say sort of change management in general, I think one of the things that we've seen over and over again in many customers who've adopted Terraform is the upside of being able to effectively manage the cost of the resources. Because if you think about that, again, you go back to the cloud operating model, sort of even to the left of that tactical cloud, I think, historically we've seen developers be able to literally, and other folks as well, literally spin up resources in different clouds, leave them running, kind of forget they were there. And then the bill comes in, and then typically all hell breaks loose. It's like, why are we spending all this money on X, Y, or Z? And nobody can explain it, because it was there was no state, or there was no sort of guardrails around the provisioning, and the Wild West was kind of pretty prevalent in a lot of organizations. Have you seen that that's really helped on the Contentful side? I mean, have you got kind of an idea of the impact that Terraform's had on your sort of operating cost from the point of view of providing the service? I mean, obviously with what you guys do, I would imagine that having a scalable service, but one that's cost effective and cost efficient, is kind of two sides of the same coin. Has that been noticeable within the organization post Terraform Cloud?
I'd say right now we've not got any kind of strong figures to back that. But a big area we're looking at right now is things like tagging consistency. So making sure that the first step of getting a really good understanding and starting to reduce those costs is just figuring out where are those costs coming from in the first place. So something we're really keen to invest in is things like Sentinel policies. So making sure that anytime somebody deploys a new resource, we at least know which team created it, which user is responsible for it, and is this a production resource? Is this just a development proof of concept? And then from that, I think we're looking towards things like the ephemeral workspaces, so allowing people to experiment with something, but then having that automatically torn down after they're done with it. I've been guilty personally plenty of times of spinning. It's just an EKS cluster, and I'll spin that up in an account, and a month later you've got somebody chasing you down saying, hey, is this supposed to still be running here? And I was, no, sorry, it should have only needed it for a day. But having that as something that you don't have to worry about, both from a developer experience is great, and also from the cost management side of things.
Yeah, and I think that the real beauty of the ephemeral workspaces obviously is the ability for developers to continue to be able to spin up what they need, but then be able to sort of manage the life cycle of that, so we don't end up with these bloated costs and this for forever running infrastructure that nobody knows what it is or whether it's going to hurt us if we turn it off. So I think that's a really smart approach. So just talking about sort of the future and what comes next. I mean, obviously in the cloud operating model, we talk a lot about the standardizing to scale, and obviously the differences there that I talked about that may not apply to you guys, because the sort of traditional private estate may not be that relevant in your use case. So if you kind of think about the journey, maybe it's even beyond Terraform into sort of the other HashiCorp solutions that we talked about in terms of what we see at the different layers of infrastructure, security, networking, and application. Any ideas what might be next for you guys now that you've sort of cracked the code of Terraform?
So I think for us, on-prem is something we're likely not venturing into, but really what we see is a huge growth in the number of AWS accounts that we're managing. So I think bringing even more standardization, consistency, and automation to that process is a big thing for us. We need to find that balance of, we want developers to deploy as much as possible to AWS, and we want them to innovate, but we also want to do that with the guardrails, like you mentioned it. So it's finding that balance of, we don't want to be the blocker, we want to be the enabler. And I think, a big step in that is allowing teams to really take ownership of that entire process, manage the life cycle of infrastructure themselves, better understand the costs themselves, and really be the controllers of their own destiny.
So I'd like to put you on the spot a little bit, James, if I can. I'm sure many of the attendees, either live or watching the recording, are either wondering, how do I get started, or how do I convince my organization that this is the right thing? And the best examples that we always get are from folks like yourself who've been there, done it, understood the journey. I think most organizations and most customers would recognize the phases of the cloud operating model. But of course, as I mentioned, there's a lot in that. It looks simple to present it in 20 minutes, but of course you're not dealing with enterprise context or people or teams or skill sets or all of the things that are inherent in an operating organization at any point that you try and drive change or do something differently. So, if you could pick a few things where through your own experience that you guys have seen, whether that be around the people, the process, the technology, the learning, and for the folks that are listening who are kind of thinking, wow, I wish I could get, even as far as James and the Contentful team have got. What would you say were some of the top 3 or maybe 4 takeaways that you've had along the journey that you would say to everybody that's listening? Hey, think about this, think about that, go do this, don't do that. I think that would be super helpful if you could share.
Yeah, so I think one of them would be, putting yourselves if you're specifically from a platform team, this would be putting yourselves in the shoes of one of the engineers that works at your company. And I think, really talking to them, understanding their needs and what are their frustrations right now. I think, being blocked on deploying changes because people didn't have permissions to an environment was a big one for us. But bringing in Terraform Cloud allowed us to really, enable those teams to make those changes without coming to us. So understanding the needs of the customer, I'd say, is a big one. I think also just getting this into the hands of people as soon as possible. So we started off on a free trial of Terraform Cloud, and getting feedback from people as soon as possible. Maybe we had a few kind of skeptics at the start, but I think now people have seen it in action and they've seen what you can do with it. I think they've really been won over, and they see it's a huge improvement on the process that we had before. Another one I think is, we've got to keep in mind the climate that we're in, and a big one for us was cost management or cost saving. So when we looked at the amount of time that engineers were spending on these manual tasks, it was quite easy for us to look at that versus how much would Terraform Cloud cost us, and we came out with a pretty clear win there. So freeing up that time that developers had been spending on deploying these changes is now available for them to work on new projects or work on delivering new initiatives for the company. And I think that that was solely looking at developer time spent. That wasn't even considering other areas like reconciling changes that people had made outside of the process or the security and compliance areas. And I think probably the last one would be start small. So we're not we have a lot of Terraform configuration at Contentful, and we're really taking this step by step of starting off with, can we bring greenfield projects on board, and building up the confidence through showing people how does it work there before we start moving towards migrating existing things. That was something I wanted to touch on, actually, was the kind of config driven refactoring that we've had access to with new versions of Terraform. So I think the Terraform 1.7 brought this declarative remove. So that's a really big thing for us. We can now move resources from one Terraform state over to another one. So as we look back, maybe there were some workspaces that we had which were a bit bloated or managing a lot of resources. But now we can really bring things over to Terraform Cloud and restructure them to be in a way that aligns with our new or current best practices. Yeah.
Excuse me. Oh, fantastic. I mean, I guess we're coming right up on time before I need to hand back to Petter. So I'll end with one question that I always like to ask. You know, when you go through these exercises and initiatives and endeavors that you guys are on the journey of, there's always a pleasant surprise in my experience where, you know, something happens where you think, wow, I wasn't expecting that, or I wasn't, you know, I didn't factor that into my business case or my understanding. Is there something that's popped up along the way that you remember that you'd say, wow, that was like so cool because, you know, it helped us with something that we hadn't planned for, just as a way of, you know, kind of maybe giving a little bit of a look into the way that you think about things, but then there was a benefit that maybe came out that wasn't in the original plan?
Yeah, I think maybe one that we hadn't really thought about was the management of Terraform Cloud itself, and how you can now build essentially a whole platform for automating, you know, not just the infrastructure that you're running, but we're now using it for managing things like the GitHub repositories that the Terraform goes into. So we've seen not just standardization of the clouds that we're deploying to, but the environments that the engineers themselves are working in. And we've really seen that as, you know, something we didn't think about in the first place because it didn't really make sense with the way we used to use Terraform. But now we're exploring more opportunities of how can we automate other parts of the development process of, you know, setting up a new service, all done through Terraform Cloud. So it's really opened our eyes as, you know, this isn't just a platform for managing kind of traditional cloud infrastructure, but with the selection of providers available, really anything you can think of that you're working with as an engineer can fit in here.
Awesome. And then goes back to what I said before about the sort of the benefit of the provider and integration ecosystem that we have. And of course, that spans the module concepts as well, both private and public. And so I you know, I think it's super important that folks understand just how broad and important that ecosystem is, not just to HashiCorp, but also to customers like you guys as well. So James, thank you so much. I guess we're right on time for that. Appreciate the candidness and the conversation. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and wish you all the very best for the continued journey at Contentful.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks very much, Christian.
And with that, I'll pass back to Petter.
Yes. So first of all, I wanted to say I feel lucky and humbled to being part of the journey with James with Contentful. So let's say, just as I remembered, we started this journey together, and as I hear, everything went so smooth, and I really feel humbled about that. So in the end, I would like to thank, first of all, of course, James from Contentful, to sharing the knowledge, and of course to taking time and spending the hour with us, and of course to Christian for the very interesting discussion, but also for his presentation, which we will share. So for the audience, for participants, you have an opportunity to ask questions through the F&A or Q&A section down below. If there are no questions left, I would wrap it up. So I hope you guys all enjoyed the discussion and you learned something from Terraform Cloud, and of course, you learned from Contentful. And as you can see, you will also get some information from Marianne about if you want to contact us. You can contact us to talk about Terraform Cloud. And of course, there will be a link posted about Terraform Cloud overall, how you can start with the free version, like James mentioned. And finally, as we mentioned at the beginning, this live stream is recorded and will be available, I would say, next week, beginning of next week. So have a great day, and many thanks for joining us, and enjoy the week. Thank you.